and then I'll let you go. Well, good evening and welcome. We are so excited that you have joined us for the SSDA and CollegeWise Parent Night. I'm really excited tonight to introduce my friend Becky Mata from CollegeWise to give her presentation, but certainly just want to give you a few housekeeping rules before we get started. If you have questions during the presentation, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Those questions will then be transmitted through the magic of technology to Becky, and she can take a look at those. Because this is a webinar, your camera and your microphone are off, so we can't see you, we can't hear you, but we are recording this presentation. So if you want to go back and review all of the great information, by all means, you can do that. You can go to strivescan.com/SSDA. Your children will have an opportunity tomorrow to do a virtual college fair, so please encourage them to do that. And now, without any further ado, Becky Mata from CollegeWise.
Thank you so much. That was a great intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Becky. I am coming in live from Orange County, California. One thing that I love about everything that we're doing virtually and online is that we can access more people with more information. And what we like to say at CollegeWise is more sane college counseling information. And we are an independent college consulting company all across the US. We work with thousands of families every year, especially right now, as we talk about, our seniors making their final decision and working with rising seniors as they start thinking about college and what that actually means for their future. But ultimately, what we want to do is truly help families find the perfect match for their college fit. And so applying with confidence through your essays, by making a smart and balanced college list is part of the process as we support and guide families. There's a lot of different services that we like to offer, and I'll just touch on them really quickly, but counseling services, like I mentioned. We also love to support families through test prep, and I'll talk more about that later. And then subject tutoring and support academic services. So I'll give you some contact information at the end if anyone would like to follow up. But essentially, let me just give you some background information on myself so you know who exactly is presenting in front of you. I've been in higher ed for the last six and a half years, working as an admissions counselor for a private institution called Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then I moved over to the West Coast for about 4.5 years to work as a regional admissions officer, serving students across the West Coast, talking to them about their application, scholarship and financial aid, reading applications, essays, etc. And so I'm coming from that lens and perspective. And I hopped over to CollegeWise about 2.5 years to start working directly with students in more of that developmental process as they think about their high school experience, their academics activities, extracurricular opportunities, and then eventually sending them off to college to their best fit school. So today, I definitely want to hit on how we are going to talk about what it means to work hard throughout high school. And obviously with test prep and the landscape of test prep kind of changing and going through a little bit of a makeover, if you will, due to COVID. And I definitely want to give you sane information to help you learn a bit more about what it means to consider the SAT, ACT, and AP exams, and eventually, hopefully, we can add a little bit more fun in this presentation as well. And so today's agenda, I would love to be able to answer these questions and hit on these specific pieces. So actually giving you a quick overview and history of the SAT, ACT, and AP exams, and we'll talk about subject tests and how they're kind of going away. And then a little bit of a timeline of when you should take them. If you are a parent or a student right now who's a freshman, sophomore, junior, you might be considering like, when is the best time to start prepping, what type of prep, what resources out there, etc. And then a little bit about how colleges actually view and understand standardized test scores and how it comes into play into your application. And what AP exams actually mean and how they kind of bring an additive element to your application as well. Preparation, I touched on that. And then what does actual test optional admissions mean? And I'll touch on that a little bit too. So a brief history of the SAT, and I don't want to belabor this point or bore you, but in the early 1900s is when we started to kind of see this idea of a standardized process. And so during the 19th century, students typically typically gained acceptances to their universities by passing a preferred type of institutional owned admissions exam. And so that was by the actual college themselves. But then a group of kind of bigwig higher ed presidents decided to come together to create something called the College Board, which is actually known as now the overseer of the SAT. And they got together and they said, we should probably think of a more standardized process that could be more nationwide and maybe even eventually international. And so they created this SAT. And so this is basically a standardized test. For those of you who have maybe taken the PSAT, you know, in two different sections that actually will assess a student's reading and their math capability. And so known as the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which has been around since the 1900s, but got a couple different makeovers throughout the years and a couple times in the early 2000s, and most recently in 2016. So that's kind of where you see the most recent example of the SAT out of a 1600 instead of a 2400 score. But then you have this other rivalry, so the tale of two tests, the ACT. And the ACT kind of was birthed out of a spin-off of the SAT in a sense, and we can attribute and give credit to Professor Everett Franklin Lindquist. It's a mouthful. He was from the University of Iowa, and he went through a couple different research opportunities to look at what students are really being assessed for through the SAT. And he kind of thought, we could probably create an exam that's a little better in terms of testing a student's assessment and ability and capability to be college ready. And so from his own research with the help of some other professors, created the ACT, which is different in that it's a 4-part exam with 45 minutes in each section. So this one in particular was set up to test students in different facets of English, math, science, natural sciences, but also in writing. And so that's kind of where you see the ACT taking rise in the mid to late 1900s, 1950s, and eventually becoming much more at a larger scale, reaching more families and more students in the 70s and 80s. And so from there on, the rivalry between the SAT, ACT has continued. In some sense, they see each other as brothers and sisters that kind of sharpen each other in the way that they update their exams. And so you can kind of tell when one or the other updates themselves based on something else the other test decided to do. And so that's kind of the overview of the brief history of the SAT, ACT, and AP exams, a bit more of that focus on particular subjects. So AP exams are not standardized tests for admission to college, but they are used as a form of signifying a level of mastery in a particular subject area. So for those of you who are taking an AP class that is known to be a college level class, you'll take the AP exam coming up in May and even in June to show your level of mastery and to receive a score out of 5. And so the potential to earn college credit is kind of the process of why AP exams exist, and to also show that level of mastery. And that is also overseen by College Board, who also oversees the SAT. Now, the SAT subject tests, for those of you who have been keeping up with your standardized testing news, you may have seen the newsletter from College Board back in January of this year, a few months ago, and they decided to say, we are closing out subject tests starting this year. We are no longer offering them. We recognize that actually not a lot of colleges require them, and not a lot of students are trying to take them as much. And so we see this as a good direction of saying, you know, SAT subject tests, they thought that they could be an indication of college readiness for a specific type of subject, but it actually was not a correlation that they could make. That was unfound. And so SAT subject tests are going away. And so we are going to say, I'll see you never, kind of like this cat right here. So say goodbye to SAT subject tests. Now, many students that I work with always ask, Becky, which is the best exam for me? And this is going to be a nuanced question because it always depends on the student. And so you'll hear me say this answer quite often. I'll say it depends. And so the SAT, ACT, two standardized tests that are available to students across the US, you have a choice to pick from one or the other. Many colleges, and I'll talk more about this eventually, but many colleges have moved towards test optional, and I'll give you some insight into what that actually means. But essentially, you want to start with you as a student and understand how you like to learn and how you like to test. You want to play up to your strengths. And so when you review the SAT, you want to ask yourself, do you like to problem solve? Do you enjoy math? Or do you hate time crunches? The SAT is probably one that's going to be more favorable for you and be a better fit exam. Now, the SACT, if you're really good at memorizing formulas and you prefer reading to math, or you like straightforward problems, this one is probably going to be a better fit test for you. Now, to go into a little bit more of detail, so the ACT is one where it has 4 different sections, like I mentioned. It does have a science section, it does have a math section, but each section out of the 4 are 45 minutes long. So if you are somebody who can take an exam and do well where you're not running out of time for those section tests, the ACT may be more preferable for you. It also has a little bit more of a stronger bent towards testing you on your level of reading comprehension. So if you find yourself being very strong in that quadrant of reading, comprehension, writing, the ACT could potentially be more favorable to you. If you're good at geometry, if you love analyzing charts, graphs, and tables, this one may also be a point towards taking the ACT. Now, the SAT is 50-50 in terms of reading and math. And so for those of you who are a bit more stronger in math, and maybe you've already taken pre-calc as a junior, this could potentially be a better fit test for you. And I'm always using the word potentially because there is that small margin where you take a pre-ACT or a practice SAT and you compare those 2 scores. And I'll talk a little bit about diagnostics, and you'll find if you review a concordance chart, you look at which test score for the ACT matches up with the SAT, and you don't really see that too much of a difference in test scores, then it truly is up to you as a student to say, I felt most confident and most comfortable when I was taking the ACT or when I was taking the SAT. So that's just a good rule of thumb to kind of start that conversation of which test may be a good fit for you. If you are a sophomore right now considering testing, if you're a junior and haven't tested yet, or still kind of in that limbo phase of figuring out which test is most favorable to you. Now, there are a few misconceptions about the SAT, ACT that I just want to touch on really quickly so that, you know, if anyone is worried or you're kind of hearing about these different myths and ideas about the tests that are big and scary, I just want to kind of put those to bed. So the writing section. Traditionally, colleges have not required the writing section. It's eventually become a non-essential piece to the SAT, ACT. Now, why do they still offer it? Some colleges may say they recommend it, which essentially means they're not going to penalize you if you don't take it. But if you do take it and you submit your writing score with your SAT or ACT exam, they'll review it as part of the overall application review. Now, if you go on, if you type in compassprep.com and you type it in Google and you look up something called ACT writing, SAT, essay requirements, they created a very nice, beautiful chart that will give you an idea and a sense for how many colleges do not look at the writing score. So this misconception that you need to prep for the writing section, that you have to take the writing section, it's actually not true. If you're unsure about whether or not the particular college you'd like to apply for still requires it, I believe it's less than 5 schools across the US, and maybe it's even changed now because of COVID, you'll want to call the admissions office directly, but most likely they will either say, nope, we're not going to look at it even if you take it and send us the score, or maybe they'll say, yeah, we'll review it if it comes with your overall score. Which administration is best? This again goes towards the question of which test is playing to your strengths. Which test helped you feel like you were your most confident test taker? Which one did you feel like you weren't running out of time? And which one did you feel like prep was pretty decent and you felt like you were prepared to take that exam? So taking a couple practice or diagnostics, as I call it, will give you a better idea of which test plays to your strengths and which one would be best for you. I need a 1500 SAT in order to get into anywhere. Oh my goodness. I talk to a lot of my families and students who just ask me, what is the perfect score to get into X school? Well, if you want to talk a perfect score, it's going to be 1600 out of 1600. No, but the reality is many students are being admitted to lots and lots of colleges with a score that is not a 1600, that is a score that is not a 36. And so I want to give you some hope and let you know that your entire admission is not fully based on just your test score. When we talk about holistic admissions review, this truly is, and this has become more and more the direction of how admissions counselors review their students' applications. They're looking at the whole process. They're looking at your course rigor, the classes you've taken, freshman, sophomore, junior, and what you're taking senior year, your test scores, your personal essay supplements, your letters of recommendation, the activities that you've been involved in. And so that is your holistic review. So for those of you who are saying, I need to get the perfect score, I'm going to take as many exams as possible. Please reconsider how you allocate your time and how you allocate your mental energy and space, because there are other pieces to the application process that I would argue are more worthy of your time and your effort and your attention. Colleges want both the SAT and the ACT. I get this question a lot too. Which test is better? Which one do I look, will I look more favorable with? It is neither the SAT or ACT. It is one or the other. It truly is, again, whichever test is the best fit for you and that you test well in. Okay, how do colleges view the SAT, ACT, and AP exams? When I talked about holistic review, and I mentioned all of those different aspects, you think of it kind of like a pie or a puzzle. You're looking at the student's transcript, which tells you a few things. It tells the admissions officer the classes they've taken, and it tells them how rigorous of a coursework they've taken. How many classes that are honors or APs have they taken, maybe IB, and have they challenged themselves year to year to year? I know for some of my students, by the time they're seniors, they're tired. They don't want to have to take, more challenging coursework. They would really love to have a lesser load of coursework. And I talk to them about that. And that's where my counseling kicks in. And I ask them, why? And I ask them, what do you think colleges will think when they review your transcripts, the AP classes you've taken or that you had access to, but you decide not to take? And so that factor in that piece, also plus the SAT or ACT that you've taken, and your essays and letters of recommendation, and your AP exam scores, all of that comes together to show a level of consistency in your overall narrative. And so what college admissions counselors want to see is that there aren't any inconsistencies. And if there are inconsistencies, then this is where we can talk about what test optional could potentially mean for you. Now, for AP exams, I mentioned this earlier, certain colleges will offer a college credit for a particular score. Now, I mentioned the AP exam is out of 5. And so if you score a 3, 4, or 5, depending on the college that you're hoping to send your AP exam scores to, and the actual class that you took, they may or may not offer you college credit for that score. So it's important for you to start looking at, okay, what AP exams will they accept? What's the minimum score that I need? And which class might this actually knock out for me? So when they review your SAT, ACT, AP exams, they're looking at it contextually in the larger picture of holistic admissions. And now with colleges that don't require the SAT or ACT, that kind of shows you that they really do want the student to decide whether or not it would be beneficial for you to show your test scores as an additive piece to your application, your overall application. So that's something that you would want to review as you review which colleges you're hoping to apply to. Now, I talk about test optional. Anybody love Schitt's Creek? What is happening? What does test optional actually mean? Test optional is not a myth. Test optional is real. I encourage you to visit a really, really helpful website. It's called Fair Test, F-A-I-R test.org. And fairtest.org has put together a very, very nice comprehensive list of universities that have agreed to say, we are truly test optional. And even some colleges that have said, we are test blind. So I'm out here in California. Our University of California system and our Cal State system has gone test blind. They're no longer even taking the SAT and ACT into account for admissions. They're looking at AP exam scores, but they're not looking at them as a point of admission. So what is this about test optional? Test optional means if you take the SAT or ACT and you take a look at your score, and you look at a particular college and you look at their average admitted student profile, you Google them, type in X name of school, average admitted student profile, and they give you a range of what their average admitted students test scores are, the ACT or the SAT, and you line it up with the score that that you've had from your ACT or SAT. If you are in that top half of that score range, it may be beneficial and additive for you to submit your test score. It may not. It also depends on the program. For my students who are CS, engineering, any students who are really hoping to go into biological sciences for a pre-med program, this is going to be a little bit more competitive and nuanced as you look into that. So be aware of how the average admitted student profile test score lines up to yours. And if you are on that bottom half or below their average admitted profile, and you have a stronger outset of your transcripts with your courses and your grades, it may be beneficial for you to not show your test scores and to apply test optional. There's no preferential treatment for students who submit test scores or who do not submit test scores. And I want to make that very clear. Some of my parents have truly come into my office, virtual office, and said, is my student going to be penalized for not submitting a test score? Does this mean that, that they didn't want to prep and they didn't show enough of, taking as many exams as possible? There's no such thing. There's no way admissions counselor can make that assumption, and they will not make that assumption. So it truly is up to you as a student to recognize what is most beneficial for you and additive in this test optional policy and process for your particular schools. All right, so now let's talk about timeline. The importance of timeline is this. You have specific dates that you have to register for the ACT and SAT. There are dates that close off, and then there's late registration where there's an added fee. So when you go on College Board's website or ACT.org, you'll want to get a good look at the calendar right now. And with a lot of upset out here on the West Coast of cancellations and tests and such, you want to be aware of that as well. But look at your personal calendar, look at your family's calendar, see if anything's going on that you need to take into account for. And take a look at the different administrations that are happening. Typically, the SAT has one or two over the summer, the ACT has a few more, and then you'll have some in the fall and in the spring. And I'll talk through each grade level and what to expect. But the importance here is that you want to make a plan. You want to make a plan because if you need to prep, then you also need to make a plan well in advance for that, and more on that later. So let's talk to the freshmen and the sophomores in the room. If you are a freshman or sophomore this year, and you're rounding out your year, you're rising freshman, rising sophomore, and you're considering the SAT or ACT, do not stress about the pre-ACT or PSAT. Those are scores you do not send on to your colleges. They do not need to see them. They will not accept them. And so truly the pre-ACT and the PSAT is something for you to just take into account and note as kind of your base level score. Now, for those of you who feel discouraged by your practice or PSAT, not to worry. There's so much that you can do to help prepare yourself. And you also want to take into account that you probably haven't covered the amount of math that you need to do well and to have, stronger scores in that math section for the SAT, for example. AP tests, if your curriculum aligns well and you're at a level where you're really showing strength in a particular subject area that offers an AP class and your high school allows you to take it, consider taking that as part of your course rigor for the following semester or year, and take the May exam. I love encouraging my students to take the exam because there really is no harm done in taking the exam. Because if you test well, then you could potentially get college credit. If you don't test well, that's okay. You're not going to be using that as a form of admission to college. And so it doesn't hurt to take it, and you can see what score you could potentially receive so that you could potentially get college credit. So by the end of your summer of 10th grade, what I like to work with my students on is thinking about taking a full-length practice test in both the ACT and SAT camp. We want to think about which is, again, their strongest test, where they are putting forth their best and get a better idea of which one to prepare for and look at their calendar for which administrations are coming up to take their first official exam during junior year. So you can meet with your counselor, your high school counselor, or if you work with a counselor, talk to them about that SAT, ACT timeline so you know what's to come. For those who are rising juniors, as you're thinking about the PSAT, the National Merit exam in the fall, January of junior year, so you're going to be looking to take some of that in the following year. there isn't necessarily anything that you do to prep for that. It truly is just to see where you are at in that particular stage of your studies. The national merit could potentially be something that you earn as a finalist or semifinalist. That could be something additive to your application, but that's something that you'll want to look at through College Board's website. But taking your first SAT or ACT exam is something that we love to advise here at CollegeWise. One, because if you get your first one under your belt, you kind of get the jitters out, and you know what to expect the second time that you take it. And the reason being, if you take your first one before the end of junior year, then you have some time to look at the future administrations in the spring or summer, and maybe even in the fall before the end of October, if you're applying for early action decision for schools, to take a second exam if you feel like that could help you. So finishing the ACT, SAT testing by June, and then planning for 2 official or 1 official exam upcoming so that you have that on-ramp in time if you would like to take advantage of that. Again, consider taking your AP exams. Now, I mentioned about the subject tests that are going away. Here's my little dinosaur. No longer offering the SAT subject test, nor the SAT with the essay section. So you'll see that starting in May and in June, those are going to be going away, and those will be no longer. So you don't have to worry about those anymore. For those of you who are going into your senior year, you are going to be finishing up tests probably around the time of October. Now, for those of you who are applying what you call regular decision that have deadlines in the spring, like in January or in February, summer and December, you'll have to see the nuanced deadlines for certain colleges. You could potentially take another one in October or November, but I would caution you on that just because you are pretty much in the thick of your end of first semester of senior year. And colleges are still looking at your GPA, and they're looking at the grades that you receive your first semester and also your second semester of senior year. And so knowing how to allocate your time, knowing if it's going to be beneficial for you to take another test, or is it going to take too much out of you? I like to tell my students that if you're planning on taking test prep, you're pretty much adding on another class to your list. So if you're taking 6 classes this year, 6 courses, and you want to prep for the SAT or ACT, think of that as technically 7 classes. So that's one thing to take note of and to keep in mind is, where would I best put my time and effort towards to bring out the best in me in my senior year, and also in my college application, since you're going to be writing essays, submitting applications, etc. Yes, your grades still matter. I have some of my seniors right now who are really going through the thick of senioritis, but I tell them, hey, every college, even if you were already admitted to your dream school and you committed by May 1st, every college has the full right to take back their offer of admission if they see your final transcript and they see that you tanked or something disrupted your academic, your grades and your academic progression. So take note of that. Be aware of it and continue to do well and finish strong. Taking your AP test in May, if that's something that you're planning on doing, again, this is the great opportunity to receive college credit. And also, if you need a prep, that's fine. You can prep. There's a lot of opportunities on College Board's website, and small group prep classes that you can also find as well. So once you've taken all your exams, I want you to feel like Sai, where you're feeling like, man, I can just like bust out of this room. I've done my prep, I've done my work, and I'm totally like going forth confident, and I don't have to worry about these tests again. And so let's talk about some case studies of specific students. So we're going to work with student number 1, Genevieve. She is a class of 2022, so she's rounding out her junior year. She's never been a good quote unquote test taker. It's not her strong suit. She's somebody who works really, really hard in school, makes sure that all of her classes are in line, and she really enjoys learning just in general. She has a bit of that test anxiety, but she's on the cusp of a B or a C in Algebra 2, and it's mostly Bs in her other classes. She loves to read. She has an A in AP English and feels like that is her jam, and she gets extended time in school for tests. Now, for Genevieve, what I would do if we were starting to work at the beginning of her junior year, I would say take some diagnostics now, and then we are going to decide whether or not it would be smart for you to actually add a test to your application. Now, this would be one where I would say test optional may be more favorable for you, depending on which colleges you're applying for. And it may be smarter for her to allocate her time and her effort towards her classes and towards her homework assignments and doing well in her AP English class, which she already loves. So if she's applying to schools that are all test optional, maybe even test blind, I would probably caution her in terms of spending too much time focusing on the ACT or SAT and just saying, let's take some diagnostics, see how you do, and then we'll reconvene and talk about whether or not this would be a good additive to your application. And now, let's talk about student number 2, Mohammed. He is a 2023 and he plays varsity baseball and is talking to some coaches for UNC Chapel Hill, Columbia, Virginia. Currently, he has a B in geometry and will take Algebra 2 during his junior year, and he struggles with timing. Now, this is a student where you can go either or, but he's looking at some pretty selective schools and he's talking to his coaches who may or may not encourage him and say, you should really see if you can do some test prep and maybe submit an SAT or ACT with your application if it strengthens your application. So I would encourage him to prep over the summer and plan to take a fall exam during his next year. As he looks at UNC Chapel Hill, Columbia, and Virginia, I would say, let's look at their average admitted student profile so we get a really good sense of what is the goal score here? What are you working towards? And how can we make sure that you're receiving prep and working on your timing to make sure you feel confident when you take those exams? All right, student number 3, my last and final one, Juan. He is also a 2023, and he's currently taking pre-calculus honors this year and will likely take AP Calculus BC next year. So he really loves math, really strong in math. He usually is the first one to hand in his test in class, and he took the PSET and he scored a 1500. This is a student where I would say, yeah, this is kind of a no-brainer for you to take the SAT. You took the PSET with no prep and you scored a 1500 out of 1600. And so we're going to talk about prep over the summer. And we're probably going to see if you can take and kind of balance out, because he's already going to be taking AP Calculus BC next year, balance out taking an early exam during his first semester of junior year. So that's probably what I would advise for our student Juan. All right, so what does good test prep look like? So good test prep isn't just something that you rinse and repeat. It's going to be very consistent, and it's going to give you a better sense of your areas of strength and then your areas that you want to focus a little bit more on. So what I want to emphasize a little bit more on is that it should be pretty comprehensive and complete, and you need to give some due diligence to this process. It's not going to be just 1 or 2 or 3 sessions of prep and you're going to see a jump in your score. You're going to need some consistency. And what I would even say is if you do have this time, think about prepping 3 months in advance so that you can get used to the coaching and the practice and the critical thinking, to know how to view your problem solving, to know which areas you need to focus on to strengthen. It's not going to be just a wash, rinse, and repeat so that you can just kind of replicate what you've done, but it really does go through a thorough process of reviewing content and talking about strategies in particular sections. Again, picking the ACT or SAT. When students try to prep for both the ACT and SAT, they get really confused. So it's better for you to stick with at least one exam and plan to take at least 2 official exams to see how you do, to see if you increase in your score. Now, obviously, taking diagnostics and practice exams can be a good indication of whether or not you will increase in your test score, but usually as you take your official exam, that will be more accurate of how you're doing in your increase or how prep is helping you. So only consider switching from the ACT or SAT if you've taken a practice test and you see that very big difference in your test score concordance between the ACT and SAT. Now, preparing for your AP exams. I know for the AP exam, it's a little different because it's not like you have the same type of official preparation that the ACT and SAT provides, but you could potentially consider forming a study group. Use the free resources that your teacher is offering you and review anything that is online available to you through College Board, and set a good schedule and routine. It does come down to discipline, and it comes down to sticking with the plan. Talking to your teachers is going to be the best first place to go to, because they know, they've taught this class, they know how to prepare students, they know what questions to ask you, how to get you ready for writing prompts, etc. So ask for that additional support. Go to their office hours, show initiative, and take advantage of opportunities to talk to them. Taking any practice tests with time tests, this will really help you give a real model sense of, for the ACT, SAT as well, a real modeled sense of, okay, I have a time crunch. I'm going to leave a little timer next to my desk or next to my bed so that I know how much time it actually takes me to complete a test and to feel confident with my strategies. All right, so here's some free helpful resources. You can go to Khan Academy. They also have a cool partnership that's linked to College Board. You can set up your account so that you receive questions and also updates and events and news and such. So khanacademy.org, a free, wonderful resource. So many great videos. I have a lot of my students utilize and tap into their resource as well. The SAT Daily Practice app for your phone. You can go ahead and download this right now if you'd like. It will give you some practice questions that are more tangible that you can use and start considering. The free ACT resources that are available on actstudent.org. You can also subscribe to their website, and there's also a free online ACT Academy. And then exploring your test optional schools. So fairtest.org. If you're starting to recognize like, yeah, I just don't think the SAT, ACT is for me, it's not really bringing out the best in me, I'm going to go ahead and check out some fair test schools that are test optional or test blind. This is a great resource for you to start digging into that and looking at what is available to you and which schools you would potentially want to apply to. So thinking about the now, whether you are a rising freshman, sophomore, or junior or senior, plan to take a full-length practice or diagnostic before you take an official exam. Or maybe you've already taken an official exam and you're like, I don't know, I need to reorient and recenter how I approach this. Take a practice exam. Determine which test is a better fit for you. If you're not sure about the ACT, SAT, again, taking both diagnostics, and CollegeWise actually has free diagnostics on our website, will give you a better sense of which one is more favorable to you. And so thinking about self-study, direction, self-initiative, starting a smaller group, or even some private tutoring if you feel like you need a little bit more intentional support and help, those are all additional pieces of what you could start doing now to make sure that you're prepared for your first or second official exam coming up. So word to the wise, I definitely want to ring this bell on and on and on again to all of my students and to all of you parents right now. Standardized tests do not define your intelligence, do not define your success level, do not define your value and what you can bring to your college community and future. So I want to remind every single family and student in this room right now that if you are scoring at a level that you're not so proud of or you're not happy about, that's okay. You have options. You have test optional schools, test blind schools to apply for. And if you really feel like I just have a goal score that's just in reach and I want to do a little bit more prep, go ahead and do that. But I would say make sure you're prioritizing your schoolwork and your classes and engaging in those opportunities and finding ways to truly dig into what I would call your sustained passions, continuing to see how you can do that inside and outside of the classroom before you start tucking yourself away in a corner to just constantly prep for the SAT and ACT and take it as many tests as you can. As a rule of thumb, I love to encourage my students to plan to prep and take the SAT or ACT once and be happy with it. If you absolutely feel like you want to take a second one, go ahead to get the jitters out after your first one, but please consider not taking it more than 3 times. That is the absolute part where I say, I think you're probably getting to your best score at this point, and I don't know if taking a 4th or a 5th administration is actually going to kick up your score anymore. So plan to think of it from that framework so you're not stressing over constant prep or stressing over trying to put more into taking more exams and such. And so that's just a piece of advice I'd love to give you and to remind you, a test score does not define who you are and your level of capability and intelligence. So now I'm going to flip it over to you all. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer them, and I'd love to help in the next like 4 minutes or so. And I actually need to find where exactly I can see the chat or questions. Hold on. Let me see here. Julie, is there a specific?
If you just click the Q&A button on the panel.
Okay, I think I need to quit my.
Yeah, there are no questions in the Q&A. So
folks,
okay. If you do have questions, go ahead and type those in the Q&A and Becky can answer those.
Yeah. Probably talked everybody's ear off. And so everyone's like, what's going on? Let me just share my screen again. All right. Okay, here we go. All right, question number 1 from our parent. Thank you so much for asking. Is there a way to find a summary of this webinar to have handy and review it? There is a we are recording this right now, and so your student will be receiving the recording, I think tomorrow. Is that right, Julie?
Actually, they're going to be available on the website strivescan.com/SSDA, and I will have that on our very last slide when we close out. So that would be a good one to take a quick screenshot of when we get to there.
Yeah, awesome. Next question, thank you. What if we are a current junior and have not taken the ACT or SAT? That is totally fine. For some of my juniors who have not yet taken an official exam, we talk about their future administration exams that they could potentially take that are available to them. And so I would plan to, again, take a diagnostic and see where they land on the ACT or SAT. If you go to collegewise.com, you can register for a free diagnostic, or email me if you can't find the link. I'd be happy to share it with you. And we'll basically give you a full assessment of which test is most favorable for you, and then give you a full-blown diagnostic to diagnose the areas of where the student is showing strength and where the student may potentially want some support and tutoring. So that's the first step. The second step would be then to really decide whether or not taking the official ACT, SAT will be an additive to their application. And that kind of depends on the list of colleges. So if you have a student who isn't sure exactly where they would like to apply to, I would say start digging into a little bit more of college research to review some colleges, look at their average admitted student test score, and kind of line that up with the diagnostic test scores for the ACT, SAT, and review how that might potentially fit into being an additive to their application to become more of a competitive applicant to those schools. If you are seeing that the test score is not necessarily falling within that middle 50% admitted student range, then I would reconsider and look at more of those test optional options, test optional schools. Okay, next question is, does CollegeWise offer test prep and counseling services in every state? Yes, we do. So we actually are known to be the largest counseling and academic services company across the US. So if you have a student who would benefit from counseling or academic services such as subject tutoring, SAT, ACT, AP, prep class, we have all of that. You can, again, go to our website, collegewise.com, or feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to chat with you and talk more about what's available to help in terms of counseling and also with test prep.
Well, I think if there aren't any other questions in the chat, I want to thank Becky for her great presentation, and certainly for all that awesome information and good GIFs that she shared with us. And so I just want to remind everyone, as I said, that we are going to do a quick survey at the end of this presentation. So when you click out, you will see a very quick 4-question survey. So if you could take a moment and answer those, that would be fantastic. That will help us as we plan for future events. Definitely sign up for more sessions if you want. Stick around. Becky will still be presenting the next hour. And then, like I said, recordings of all of the presentations are available at strivescan.com/SSDA. So thank you again for joining us. Have a good evening.